Welcome back to Straight Talk from the Homeland. I'm Len, and I'm speaking to you today from Yerevan, Armenia. We'll be speaking today about some of the critical unfolding events day by day that we see that may concern the very survival and future of Artsakh. Today we're going to be joined by a very inspiring young woman who is a Canadian Armenian activist with Artsakh family roots and who is well qualified to speak on how the Artsakh people feel about these events. Welcome, Lucine Dadayan.
Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. It's great to meet you in person, finally, after so long. And really pleased to be here, sitting with you and talking to you.
Thank you, Lucine. We have quite an interesting time at the moment here with many things going on in Armenia and Artsakh. I'm sure that the international community are watching on with great interest, but why do you think that the international community aren't so clear about the status of Artsakh being a completely separate entity from Azerbaijan? In other words, no separatism involved. Why do you think that the people in the rest of the world, that they're not aware of this?
Well, I guess the biggest reason for that is that Azerbaijan spent billions of dollars to corrupt the whole international community and to tell the whole world that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan, which is wrong. Artsakh has nothing to do with Azerbaijan, has never been part of Azerbaijan, for the reason that Azerbaijan was never a recognized country until 1991. Even the League of Nations didn't recognize Azerbaijan in 1918 when it declared independence. And so when the Soviet Union collapsed, Artsakh, just like every other single country, 15 of the former Soviet Union countries, had the right to secede from USSR. According to Articles 3 and Article 5 of the USSR secession law, Artsakh fulfilled its all legal aspects to become an independent country.
So it's not a battle between territorial integrity and remedial secession. It's not a battle as is often portrayed.
No, absolutely no. And I think the international community is just being hypocrite not to want to recognize Artsakh as an independent country just because it goes against their oil and caviar interests.
Perhaps it also might have something to do with the position of the West against Russia at the moment, because Armenia is often associated with Russia, so they tend to think of Armenia as being within that orbit, so it's not something that we want to encourage.
Well, to be fair, the Russian conflict is just very recent, but it's also true that historically the West has been very anti-Russia, and of course Russia has been guarantor for Armenia, and that has something to do with it. But at the same time, I personally think Russia plays much lesser role than Azerbaijan playing a bigger role. I mean, we know Azerbaijan's edits are in Panama Papers, in Pandora Papers, in Paradise Papers, over and over and over again, where corruption level is just too high. Azerbaijan has been corrupting politicians right and left, and they know that they are lying, but they still do it for their own oil interests. And particularly now that people are in the West and in North America, they need the oil and they wanted to cut the oil from Russia. Of course, they are going to be even more reliant on Azerbaijan, sadly, and they are going to take their position and talk about Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, which has nothing to do with Artsakh. It's just a sad reality that the West can advocate for human rights, can advocate for democracy, and at the same time support a country that has a record of human rights violations, that has a record of dictatorship, of corruption, all the things that they advocate against, they defend this country. Whereas Artsakh, being a democratic country, and it's not just me saying, it's the international organizations ranking Artsakh versus Azerbaijan's democracy index, and of course Artsakh is a democratic country, whereas Azerbaijan is the most corrupt and dictatorial countries out there.
So the question is, why would any Armenian feel comfortable being part of that Azerbaijani dictatorship? That's not a question that I hear Azerbaijanis answer. If they really thought that Artsakh could be brought within Azerbaijan, then really the actions that they've taken over, not just since 2020, but over the last century. We recall, of course, in 1920 there was a massacre of Armenians where the Azeris were trying to ethnically cleanse Shushi.
20,000.
20,000, yes. So, I mean, it's been going on, pogroms and massacres, for more than a century, and this is a great difficulty. So the international community think that perhaps that they have to weigh up the humanitarian aspects, and as you quite rightly mentioned, they seem to turn their blind eye from these in regards to Artsakh. Versus what they think is the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. But in actual fact, for the West, it should be a win-win. They should be able to prevent the humanitarian catastrophes that's going on every day, and we should not forget, by the way, the prisoners of war who are languishing in the prisons. And every day we need to raise this with our elected leaders around the world. But they don't need to then dismiss this need for territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, because Artsakh was never part of territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. So if we just move on from there and talk about the current situation, where we have people here in Armenia talking about a potential peace plan or peace agreement with Azerbaijan. How do you feel about such a prospect?
I don't think it's possible to have any peace agreement with Azerbaijan, and I'm saying it because that peace agreement is going to be forced, and because we have seen what peace looked like during Soviet times. This has been their signature. Beheadings is nothing new for Azerbaijanis. They have been doing it during the Soviet times. If they can kill the kid just because his ethnicity is Armenian, what kind of peace we are talking about? There is no, unfortunately, there is no peace possible, particularly that the last 30 years, Azerbaijan was spreading Armenophobia. The Armenophobia is state-sponsored, state-mandated education to teach kids to be hating Armenians. If your nation is hating the other nation and does not believe in the existence of the other nation, what kind of peace treaty we are talking about? What kind of peace agreement we are talking about? How can peace be possible between the two nations? It cannot. It just cannot be possible.
So I should also mention about the legal aspects of such proposed peace agreement. Of course, we don't know all the aspects of it, but we can guess. When you look at the current environment where Azerbaijani soldiers are on Armenia's sovereign territory, and we're not talking about a border dispute, which, to be frank, this really annoys me when I see even the Armenian media talking about it as a border dispute, which undermines the messaging to the rest of the world. It's not a border dispute that they can ignore as some sort of haggle between nations. It's an invasion, right? It's several kilometers into Armenia. It should be called invasion, not a border dispute, right? Words matter. It's very important.
Which is against Armenia's territorial integrity. Azerbaijan is invading Armenia.
Exactly. So the very thing that they harp on about, they dismiss. But then we have Turkey busy invading Cyprus, for decades now, and United Nations resolutions more than 60. So it's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? Anyway, to the point, we have a situation where the prospect of a peace plan or a peace agreement is put in place, but under circumstances where Armenia is being forcibly taken to this position. Not only in terms of the Azeris on its soil, but the threats from Baku for Sunik, even Yerevan, I see. It's unbelievable. So in 2022, we have a situation where the international community, especially the Europeans, I understand that they have a conflict on their doorstep in Ukraine, but that does not mean to say that they should force Armenia into a situation where it appears to me there'll be either a humanitarian crisis of ethnic cleansing or even genocide, as we've seen from the past, or Artsakh will be forced to become part of Russian Federation or something like this. I mean, for the Europeans, if they were smart, they would understand that there is a win-win here. They can not only prevent this humanitarian crisis, but they can also recognize Artsakh being safe, that it's in the knowledge that it's nothing to do with Azerbaijan. I don't think very many people know that the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties specifically forbids in Article 52 any treaty, any international agreement which is either by force or even threat of force, which is precisely what Azerbaijan has been doing, particularly against the Charter of the United Nations, which is mentioned in Article 52. If you look at the UN Charter, Chapter 1, Article 2, points 3 and 4 of that charter, it talks about that disputes must be handled in a peaceful manner, which is common sense. And the fourth point being that you must not take military action or action that of the very sort that Azerbaijan started in 2020, right? That was against the UN Charter. I didn't see any discussion about that in the UN General Assembly. Maybe there should be. But to my point, if a peace agreement is made in the current circumstances, then it is in violation of a convention that's both been ratified by Azerbaijan and by Armenia. There you go. So it's international law ratified by those countries. And also, it seems to me that the constitution of Armenia itself needs to be considered, because Article 6 of that constitution specifically states that international agreements need to be ratified by the National Assembly, and that includes Article 81. So I would imagine that no government in Armenia would be able to conduct behind-the-scenes agreement and sign an agreement with Azerbaijan, particularly in the circumstances you're talking about, where people who have been taught since birth to be hating Armenians can be just signed as if it's just another agreement. It cannot. What is your opinion of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from legal perspective, you elaborated it very clearly that this treaty cannot happen. This agreement is like in violation of international law. But at the same time, Azerbaijan is doing psychological terrorism on a daily basis on Artsakh people, whether it's cutting gas for almost a month, or cutting electricity, or cutting telecommunications, or playing their music and saying that people need to get used to it, or being on loudspeakers and telling people to leave their villages. Like the psychological terrorism is on a daily basis. Like the reality is very different on the ground. These people are under the threat of being ethnically cleansed. And this is kind of one of the stages of genocide. It's for a reason that the Genocide Watch Group has warned about the possible genocide in Artsakh, and genocide doesn't happen in a day. In 2005, the mayor of Baku said that in 25 years there is no gonna be a country named Armenia. We are not even talking about Artsakh. We were referring to.
So you're concerned about once Artsakh is gone,
Absolutely.
then Armenia itself?
Absolutely. It's step by step. It's no coincidence that Aliyev was organizing a big exhibition in 2018 and inviting international community members to show the historical lands of Azerbaijan, which is Yerevan. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
So it seems to me that Azerbaijan, being only 31 years old, has only been around at the blink of an eye, and yet it's now dictating that the ancient Armenian lands are theirs.
So the problem is that any peace agreement is not gonna be possible, because you cannot have peace with people who are constantly, whose government constantly says that Armenia shouldn't exist, whose population constantly believe that all Armenians needs to be killed. When you have official members of representatives of your country, such as the football player Nurlan Ibrahimov, I think his last name, when he said that there is no mercy, all kids, women, and elderly, every single Armenian needs to be killed. How can you have peace with this kind of people?
So in summary, we have discovered in these two videos that Artsakh was never part of a sovereign Azerbaijan, and without sovereignty you don't have territorial integrity. So the point is that there's no need to talk about remedial secession, because you don't separate from a place that you were never part of. And the message to the West is that you can look after the humanitarian needs of, we underlined, a democracy versus a dictatorship, without undermining the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. I think also the very important points that we were discussing included the need to ensure that any peace treaty with Azerbaijan, it needs to be in the context of stopping this Armenophobia, this racial hatred. I mean, many people around the world don't even know that even ethnic Armenians are prohibited from entering Azerbaijan, even if they're not from Armenia, right?
Not only ethnic Armenians, also like anyone who entered Artsakh, and they changed now, they also include parts of Syunik.
And we also discovered that that if the Armenian government are thinking about enacting such a peace agreement, it would go against the provisions of international law that the Armenian government itself has signed, and that it would need to, in any case, go through the internal scrutiny of the National Assembly of Armenia. Last but not least, of course, I wanted to ask you the question, how is it that anyone in Yerevan could dictate, in any case, the status of Artsakh, which is a separate entity? How is this possible?
Nobody has the right to dictate the status of Artsakh to Artsakh people. I mean, this has been a self-governed country for 30 years, and they have to have their decision, their own decision. And once again, I wanted to stress Articles 3 and 5 of the USSR secession law to start with, to understand that Artsakh is de facto and de jure. I mean, it should be de jure. For de jure, the international community needs to recognize, but I mean, it has to be de jure country, because it has met all the legal aspects of being an independent country and has nothing to do with either Armenia or Azerbaijan. Let's be honest.
Well said, Lucine Dadayan. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sure that everybody has learnt a lot. I know I have from you. Thank you for your activism and your patriotism. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, Len. It's a great pleasure, and thank you again for all you are doing for our country. It
You're
means
welcome.
a lot.